I'm going to be advertising for Body Armor a lot because I'm guzzling this stuff like a banshee. I got sick on Christmas Day, and I think it's like 2024 strain of COVID. I went to the doctor and they tested for COVID and said no.
Okay, so I'm going to do like a brief introductories so that whenever I put this on the podcast, it'll kind of marry over a little bit easier.
Okay.
Cool. Ladies and gentlemen, we have with us today Charlie Fox, the owner operator of Pinstripe Pedals, and he's going to tell us all about their product lineup. I stumbled across them because an individual we just interviewed here on the channel not too long ago by the name of Junior Thomason said, "You've really got to check these guys out. They've got a lot of good stuff." And I love Junior's work. And I just knew when I went over there and looked at the website that I really wanted to get you on here so that you could help to sort of not just sort of solidify what your product line is, because that's obviously that's one of the main reasons I brought you on here. But also what I want you to do is help to maybe demystify some of these, I guess, truisms or altruisms or whatever you want to call it, that individuals, it's crazy because I think your product line is so needed, but yet people don't know they need it until they know they need it. And it's not always just a straightforward, like, oh, cause I think there's a lot of misconceptions. So that's what I would like to do is kind of hopefully clear up a lot of those misconceptions today. So first and foremost, thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah.
Really
for having me.
appreciate you. And I appreciate you too coming on
He's
and
my
not
buddy.
knowing that this was going to be a video.
Yeah. Whoops. Shout out to Junior. He's my buddy. We talk on the regular. A lot of times we're just complaining to one another about various things that happen in the world of building building pedals, commiserating with one another. But yeah, he's become a good friend, and he's definitely he's also a lot of people don't know he's a real barbecue aficionado. He actually has a I'm trying to remember what it is, but he's got like an IG just about barbecue. So you need to check that out.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, I did not know that.
Yeah. If
We
you're from Missouri or Oklahoma, you have to be a barbecue fan. That's kind of a requirement. Texas, probably too.
right. So that's awesome that you guys know each other. And I think whenever we talked, I think he mentioned something about you guys had met up at some point in time.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. Yeah. We broke bread together. Yeah.
nice, nice.
Yeah. Good guy.
So I noticed that with you and Junior, a couple of other companies that are sort of, I think it's Goodwood Audio. There's a couple of other companies out there as well who are being a little bit more vocal about their faith, which I think is really super cool. And Junior, he was unashamedly telling me, "Oh yeah, I these pedals are for worship leaders, like just straight up, like everybody can use them." But I thought that was super cool. But anywho, so let's take a little trip in the time machine and let's go back a few years ago and what inspired the creation of the Pinstripe Pedal Company and what problem were you aiming to solve for musicians whenever you sort of broke out here?
So two things. The way I kind of got started into my background is consumer electronics. So I started professionally in consumer electronics in 1992. Worked in I had worked previously in car audio. I probably started in that industry in about 1986. but more on the retail level. Moved to manufacturer's level in '92. Stayed in that world for about 26 years. But in a parallel universe, I started doing um, pro audio in churches. Started off in a portable church. I helped a guy who was pretty experienced, had been trained up, and had actually done system design and stuff like that. But it was a small portable church in a little town in Oklahoma, and so I started helping this guy. And about a year in, he's like, "Hey, I'm moving to Texas. It's yours." So
Wow.
for the next 3.5 years, I did just portable church, setting up, taking the whole PA out of a trailer, setting it up in the gym of a school. And, and it was back in the '90s. So it's, worship team, vocal team, bass, drums, all the stuff, and wedges, and having to set it up and tear it down every week. And so being that level of, it's just like setting up for a concert, every week.
Yeah.
You have to plug in everything and then tear it right back down and put it back in the trailer and wait till next week. So learned a lot about troubleshooting, learned a lot about connectivity, learned a lot about just what it takes to make that stuff happen. Um, in the meantime, kind of got interested. One of the things that two things that piqued my interest were microphones and direct boxes. And I kind of became a direct box nerd, I would say. There's two guys that are probably direct box nerds in the US, me and Lucas Burton, who works for Rupert Neve Designs, which we talk pretty regularly about other stuff, but we're both direct box nerds. So he and I, kind of claim that title. So nice, super smart guy. Um, but one of the things, um, and I continued on in that path, but one of the things that I saw quite often was, the typical tuner, acoustic guitar into tuner, usually Boss tuner, into DI of some kind. And the fact that, the tuner's going this way and the DI is going this way, and the worship leader's trying to
Yeah.
step on the moving target and mute their guitar before, after, at the beginning of service, end of service. It just always bugged me. And being an engineer by both birth and education, I'm, as my wife says, solving problems you didn't know existed. So that was where kind of the idea of, why do these direct boxes not interface with guitar pedals better? Why are they designed with the input jacks in the wrong place, in my view? And so that was where the first product that we developed was the LWDI. And the thing was is that I just kind of built some DIs for my church that I was attending at the time, and I built them in some pre-painted, pre-powder coated white boxes that I got, just buying stuff around, bought transformers and just connectors and put it together. But these were little white boxes, and so they were around my church for half a dozen, 10 years, whatever. And one of the other guys was like, where are those little white DIs that you built? And so that was why our first product was the LWDI, the little white DI. That's just where the name came from, just common language. And so when I turned 50 in 2016, a work colleague, he started another business, and he was doing actually doing thermal imaging of roofing systems with UAV. And it's like a $30,000 camera on a $1,000 UAV. It's pretty crazy. But yeah, shout out to my buddy Ernie. And he was like, we were just talking about, the rate. It was like, wow, we got 15 years to retirement. It's like, wow, that's kind of crazy. And it was one of those deals of we've been kind of, working for the man for all of our careers. And what are we doing for ourselves? Um, for retirement. What am I, am I just is that gonna be my legacy? I'm just working for the man or whatever for that long. And so he was like, you need to get into guitar pedals, man. You really like guitar pedals. It's kind of a passion of yours. You ought to pursue that. And I'm like, wow, yeah, sure. There's only 5 pedal builders in the state I live in. And the world does not need another tube screamer, in my opinion. So it just didn't make any sense to me. And I know a lot of the guys that are in the pedal building world already. I knew a lot of them before. It's like some of these companies existed. I knew some of them. And so um, I just didn't want to do what everybody else is doing. I didn't see any value in that. And so having done the direct box thing and being kind of having a passion about that, I was like, well, let's see what happens. It's not going to kill me. I'll start it just in my living room and see what happens. And started building those. And but the other part of it is I didn't want to build to a price point. I wanted to build the nicest product that I could build. So using connectors from name brand people, using switches from U.S. sources. We use connectors from Switchcraft, which is a U.S. company. Neutrik, okay, they're German. You got me there. And switches from a company in Illinois, I believe, called Grayhill, which if you're in high-end home audio stuff, you know that name. And then we partnered up too with Jensen Transformers, which is another U.S. company. And if you know anything about Transformers, that's the only company name you know is Jensen. But so super nice components together, hand assembly, making that our thing, made in USA, making direct boxes great again, kind of a thing. That was kind of the thrust of what we did. And, doing the red, white, and blue pinstripe, not like crossing over into nationalism, but being proud and grateful for the peaceful country that we live in and a prosperous country that we live in. Just kind of giving a nod to that. So started that company in 2016, and building for touring musicians. One of my first clients was James Gregory, and he's been the bass player for a couple of decades for Michael W. Smith. Was one of our first clients. And got a lot of feedback from James. Great guy, love that guy. And then another guy that we connected up with fairly early on, it's a guy named Scott Eric Olivier, who has an amazing resume. If you go look him up, he's played with tons of people. He's one of those people, like, if you know him, you know him. If you don't know him, you should know him, kind of a thing. And he's just an amazing guy with an amazing set of ears. Understands the language of electronics, has been a huge help, and is in the process of getting feedback from Scott. He's sparked the onus for several other products along the way. So that was kind of the genesis of it. And then in 2018, there was an opportunity to get away from corporate America and just jump off and do Pinstripe Pedals full time. And so took a leap of faith, and God was faithful in my stupidity.
Thank God he is.
and just continue to bless it. So, and then kind of in 2019, 2020, that was when modelers started to, amp modelers started to become more prevalent. And One of my friends got an HX Stomp. He's actually Kendall Combs, who, if you know who Charlie Hall is, Charlie Hall was a fairly prominent, fairly well known worship leader in the you know late '90s. Kendall toured with him, and uh, shout out to Kendall. Kendall was the first bass player for Mercy Me before they got a recording contract.
Wow.
So Kendall got this HX Stomp, and he was like, "Hey, I need one of your DIs," and I'd actually done something for another touring band that was kind of a one-off thing with line isolation transformers, and I was like, "Well, let's instead of doing the DI thing, let's try this line isolator thing. Let's see how this works." Because he plays in a lot of different venues and needed the ability to be able to lift ground, which is a tough thing to do with an HX Stomp. Um, and so I built up a pedal board for him, and put the original kind of DISO on there, is what I kind of called it, for dual ISO. I don't care. There's always this controversy about how do you say it, DI. I don't care. It's like a puppy. Once you buy it and take it home, it's yours to name. Call it what you want. Uh, so then we did a lot of listening tests, and we did a lot of comparisons, and we noticed that there was a substantial difference in the way that sounded, the AHX Stomp pushing against direct box transformers versus the way that it sounded with the line isolation transformers. And now saying it's a Jensen, the first thing is people say, oh, it has a Jensen transformer, and it's like, well, that narrows it down to 40 different part numbers, and that's just what they have stock in their catalog.
Right.
And then when you get down to line isolation transformers, that narrows it down to about 8 part numbers. And so we actually went through and chose a specific part number based on how it sounded and the application. And so that was the thing, was choosing the right part number for the application. And there's a bunch of different part numbers there, and different I won't give away all of our secrets as to why we chose that transformer, but it was chosen not so much for the specs, but for the way that it sounded, or actually didn't sound.
Yeah.
And that's something that a lot of people will say. Um, when we first started, like, I knew it was going to be an uphill battle, but it was like, it wasn't like this, it was like this. And trying to teach people, re-educate people about what the difference is between a direct box and a line isolator, and why you don't want a direct box for the application of guitar modelers, why it's just the wrong tool for the job. It's trying to roof a house with a sledgehammer kind of a thing. It's just the wrong tool for the job. It will work, and it does some of the things that it needs to do, but there's some real drawbacks with it that using a line isolation transformer um, will correct.
Interesting. So you've covered a lot of ground here, but one thing I wanted to sort of circle back around to is, whenever I used to, I should say, whenever I would look at a DI box, or I would even, the concept would come into my mind, like, hey, I might need to use one of these. I was always thinking of just the typical plug it in here, plug it out the back, it goes straight to the board. It just seemed like such a simple, straightforward. And then whenever I started looking on your website, I'm like, wait a minute. Like, not only are you guys doing the simple, straightforward, if that's for you, you guys have that lineup, but you guys also have done something that I have been like screaming from the rooftops, like, guys, we need to fix this. So back when the amp modelers started coming out, as an audio engineer, the first thing that I noticed was, if you had, like, say, for instance, a Dream 65 reverb pedal and a Tonex pedal, and you put them on the same board, every once in a while, based off of which amp simulator you were using, they sounded great. And then you'd switch to a different one. And I'm like, wait a minute, I'm hearing phase issues.
No, you're not hearing phase issues. This is a pet peeve of mine. It's not phase. It's because there's always going to be phase issues, phase differences between two different amplifiers. What you're talking about is polarity.
Ah,
Polarity. And there's a huge difference between these two. It is, in my opinion, it is, those two terms are interchanged freely. And even like a lot of large format consoles will have a button on them that says phase, but it doesn't affect phase, it affects
it's
polarity.
actually flipping the
Because,
polarity. Yeah.
yeah, if we get down to definitions, phase has to involve delay, even though it's minute and small. If there are phase differences, there has to be a delay involved. The way I define phase, the way I like to define phase, is it is a frequency dependent delay. It's not a constant delay, it's a curve. If you have delay, then you have delay. And that time difference between input to output delay will always remain the same. Whereas phase shift, if it is a phase shift or a phase difference, that will change with frequency. Whereas polarity is either in or out. And it's, in my opinion, wrong to describe it as 0 and 180. That's not correct either, because that implies a delay, right?
Right.
So this is a big, this is, you could tell this is a big sticking point with me and a big pet peeve with me, because it's a huge misunderstanding. And one of the main things, so where polarity comes into play, and that's another thing, is like some guy on YouTube was talking about, oh guys, there's this big problem that we have now, and he called it variable latency, and
Mm,
it's a
yeah.
problem only with modelers. And it's like, no, it's not. It's not a problem with modelers. It's a problem with the amps that are being modeled. And it's not necessarily a problem. So here's where polarity comes in. A typical non-inverting gain stage in a guitar amplifier with a tube, it will invert polarity. Did I say that right? A typical gain stage of a tube amp, single stage, will invert polarity from input to output. So depending on whether you have an odd number of gain stages or an even number of gain stages, determines whether or not the input to the output is polarity flipped, right?
Okay.
And now we could fix this by reversing the speaker leads. On reality, you would not want to do that, because you would change the way the amp sounds, because the speaker is not linear between the two polarities. And that's because of the magnetic field not being linear for push versus pull. I know that I just said a whole lot there, and I need to make a whole series of videos talking about this stuff, because I previously was in car audio, and I have friends still to this day who are actually transducer engineers, guys who design speakers for a living. I learned a lot about that kind of stuff by osmosis. But at any rate, what happens is that because of the even or odd number of gain stages in a real amplifier, the amplifier will invert polarity or not invert polarity. So that when you put a real Fender up against a real Vox, they will not be in polarity with one another.
Awesome. Okay.
And so typically the way that that has been remedied is just flipping polarity at the console on the microphone. Now, some of our touring clients, we TXRX systems, TXRX being transmit and receive, that's made to carry guitar signals along either a mic cable or a tactical Cat5 over long distances. we include polarity flip switches on that. And some of our touring clients really appreciate that because it allows them to flip the polarity before it gets to the amplifier, so that when they're tuning amplifiers, real amplifiers backstage, they're able to hear them in polarity and to be able to tune them against one another rather than having to like do them one at a time and take a guess as to what that sounds like out at front
Yeah.
of house. They're actually able to hear them together. And that's another thing that we wanted to resolve with that system that no other system that I'm aware of addresses.
And that's what I was going to say. So when I'm looking at your products, you're including things that I think have sort of been no brainers, but nobody took the initiative to do it. I don't know if it was just, oh, this is how we've always done it, or, that kind of mindset. But I appreciate what you are doing, because not only is it needful, but it's going to produce, ultimately, it's going to end up producing better sound all the way around. Um,
That's the thing, is we want to address those. Something I learned at my previous job listening to sales and marketing people was something they called the 80-20 rule.
mm, yeah.
Are we building products for the 80% of the consumer market, or are we building for the 20% of the consumer market? And they, of course, wanted to build for the 80% because they're trying to sell more stuff. That is not my concern. In my being late in my career and not wanting to just have to do what makes my company survive. I mean, I want my company to survive, obviously, because I want to employ other people. But more so than that, I want to build the products that make musicians, especially touring musicians and studio musicians, live easier. So we're building for the 20, not the 80. I hope that we peel off, the top 10% and we get 30%. But we're building for the top 20% of the market. And then, I mean, we have to have that trickle down into the 80, we'll call it. We have to have that trickle down to survive. But we're building for the 20. We're building for touring musicians. Some of the guys that we're consulting with a lot and getting ideas from and getting feedback from are touring musicians. One of the questions that you had asked before, has any of the feedback inspired any other products? And the answer is absolutely yes. One of my clients is Michael Westbrook, who has guitar teched and played, and can play anything with strings on it. This guy is amazing. But he's also, because he's been a guitar tech for a number of people in the CCM market, Michael, who has his own YouTube channel and his own amp captures, by the way, shout out to him and go check his stuff out. Michael has a unique perspective and can speak from both the side and the tech side of things. And so he ends up coming through town quite a lot. And I always try to make time to go see him and talk to him and have lunch with him and just pick his brain about the tools that he needs. And so one time when he was actually teching for another band than the one he's currently playing for, he said, "Oh, this would be great if you could make this all in one box." And he showed me, a setup for acoustic guitar, and it was a wireless setup. So there were, in order to get wireless to work in an arena these days, it's all in a rack. You can't do the little wireless, thing that goes on your pedal board with the built-in tuner. Everything has to be in a rack. It has to be networked. It's usually, sending the signal over digital. It's all networked, and for frequency coordination, because every town you go to, you have to, scan the area and figure out where you can get frequencies to work. Because after the last two iterations of what the FCC did to wireless microphones, it's a real challenge. At any rate, you're having to send that signal out of the wireless at line level over a mic cable to a pedal board. So now it's at line level. You need to get into pedals that are expecting instrument level. You send that line level signal into guitar pedals and they're clipping immediately, tuner, whatever, they're
Yeah.
clipping. And so you have to drop that level down. Well, there's, some common tools that people use to do that. They were actually made for a different purpose, right? They were made for taking a DI'd guitar signal and running out of a DAW into, amplifiers, and being able to do that with any number of amplifiers. And the way that that is designed, um, having to do with impedances, it's again, it's roofing a house with a sledgehammer. It's just not the right tool for the job. And the other thing is he was having to use two different boxes to make this happen. And he was using a typical passive DI that drops the signal by 20 dB on the other end. So now you're dropping from line level to instrument level, going through your pedals, and then dropping it down to mic level. So you got a 30 dB loss in your original signal. And of course, the guitar pedals are going to add noise, all this kind of stuff. And so what we did was we combined up a different solution for dropping from balanced line to unbalanced instrument to get into the guitar pedals, and then using what is essentially our MISO on the other end, which balances the signal. It doesn't change the signal level. We built that all in one box, and it's called the WRLS, and it's all one box. And so we went from a solution that weighed 3 pounds. It took up, almost twice as much space on a board, and it cost like $500 retail. We dropped that down to about $300. It weighs 1 pound, and it takes up the space of one pedal. So, so Michael says, if you could make the, just kind of offhand says, if you could make this into one box and fix these problems, that would be great. So I came back to the shop 2 weeks later. I sent a prototype out to Michael. He tried it. He let his front of house guy listen to it. And the guy said, that is the clearest, cleanest wireless acoustic guitar I've ever heard. So I took that as a real compliment. And so now it's a real product. And that's been a big hit with a lot of our touring clients that are using wireless, because a lot of people are. Mostly though, Shure Accent, like the high end stuff that's like $4,000 a channel. And so anything you're sticking in the line is gonna, it has the potential to really jack up the signal, and you don't want to do that, right?
Right. Absolutely. So, yet again, not only are you addressing needs that people didn't know that they needed, you're also
My
helping,
wife's really smart.
but you're also helping those who actually say, like, hey, this is a valid problem that I have. Can you fix it? So that's super cool that you're listening to your client base, and you're actually coming up alongside of them and saying, well, how can we help?
Yeah.
There's a deficit in companies able to do that these days because everything's so corporatized sometimes. And one thing that I would like to sort of touch on though is, and I think this is the area where I'm kind of been seeing this myself, is there's this huge misconception on whether or not you even need a DI box. So what advice would you give to musicians that they're sort of on the fence? Do I need one? Do I not? And what would be the best way for them to choose the right DI box or interface for their specific needs?
Yeah, and that's the reason we offer, a lot of people are like, "Oh, this is the best, thing to do," and like an industry standard kind of thing. And it's like when we started out, like when we started advocating for line isolators, even the manufacturers of amp modelers were just saying, "Yeah, just get a DI box. It doesn't matter. Any DI box will do. It's fine. Don't worry about it." And there were a lot of people that was a lot of pushback on it. And it really, um, it took about 2 years of just educating people, and then somebody kind of making a knockoff of our product, we'll just say, before it kind of became an accepted idea in the industry. But it was one of those things of, I mean, one of the phrases that I like to use is hearing is believing. I can describe it all day and I can talk about it all day, but it's like what is the popular phrase that, you know, discussing music is like dancing about architecture. It's like I can use words all day, but when you hear the difference, it's not just a level difference. And so
Yeah.
let's back up and let's talk about the function of a DI. What is the function of a DI? And so that term comes from direct injection, which it was originally trying to find a solution for directly sending the signal from an instrument, a bass usually, or an acoustic guitar, directly into a mixing console, right? Whether it was live or recording. And the original easy solution was to use a transformer that was wound so that you had a high impedance on the input so that you don't load down the pickup, and a low impedance output. And so that's one of the functions of a, I mean, that's the thing about a DI is if you're just directly connecting an instrument and no other pedals, nothing else involved, that's where you want a DI box. Now there's three different kinds of DIs. I would classify. There's passive, there's active, and then there's the combination of passive and active. So a completely passive DI is just going to have a transformer, and that's it. Uh, and those don't have the highest impedance. They have a fairly high impedance, but not the highest impedance. And that's another thing you get into is like transformers don't have hard and fast impedance numbers. They have what's known as a characteristic impedance, and they actually reflect impedances input to output and output to input. It works both ways. Transformers are kind of a different deal. Then you have a purely active DI where it's just electronics. And actually, our sister company, we make such a thing. It's called the Maid. And it's just, and the reason that we developed that was people wanted a solution. They wanted to be able to put our product underneath some of the pedal train boards and mono boards where it was like, this much space underneath there. And it's like, the transformer's never going to fit. And so then it became like a challenge of how do we make this happen? Oh, we can make that happen with electronics. And so we did that with the Maid. So that's kind of a different thing. But that actually, because it's solid state electronics, it actually has a high impedance input and a low impedance output, and it can be used as either a line isolator. It's unity gain from input to output, but it can be used as a DI or as a line isolator, either way. And then the other thing is, and that's another thing to note, is there are a lot of purely active DIs that actually have gain, because they are simply an inverting buffer and a non-inverting buffer in parallel. You actually end up with about 6 dB of gain. A lot of people don't know that, and they'll just go buy an active DI, and then it's like, oh, why is this thing, why is it so hard to not clip things? So, well, you added 6 dB more gain to your signal chain there. And so, yeah. So then the other option is a combination of active electronics and a transformer, which we make a passive DI, the LWDI and the SWDI, that's purely passive, uses the Jensen, industry standard direct box transformer that a lot of people use. That was our first product, the first two products. We also make In the slow gear line that made that's a purely electronic solution. And then a year or two ago, we introduced a hybrid that's essentially a very high quality buffer in front of the same line isolation transformer we use in MISO and DISO, and that's called the Clean DI. So, and that's kind of a departure too, because it is not powered via phantom power. There just wasn't enough energy there to do what we wanted and to make it sound like we wanted it to sound. And so it is powered by your standard 9-volt Boss style, you know, brick, 9-volt pedal board power.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah. And we've had a lot of great feedback on that.
So for musicians just starting out, maybe they're building their first pedal board, maybe
Yeah.
they just got asked to play on the worship team. Most of the time there's priorities, right? Like I need a volume pedal,
Sure.
I need some dirt, some drive, I need a compressor. Where does the DI fit into their priorities?
Yeah, what I would say is you basically have, when you're building a pedal board, you have two paths, right? You can either buy a bunch of cheap stuff to get started and replace things as you go, or you can buy a few high quality things and then add to it. And I would say it just kind of depends on what are you trying to accomplish, and what do you want to do. Do you want to buy a bunch of cheap stuff and have a bunch of have a giant pedal board from the beginning, and then have to go through and replace everything one by one by one, and have a compromised signal path until you get to that better stuff? Or do you want to start with one or two things? There's so many great multi modelers out there, like the HX Stomp and the Boss GT1000 Core, that are available for just a few $100s, that are very high quality. They have a lot of great sounds in them, but you can buy just one of those and have a lot of versatility, and then have that grow with your system. You can use either one of those as, I've seen a lot of guys start with an HX Stomp, and then later on go to just using the Stomp for effects, and then add, two Tone X1s. But I think it just depends on what your tolerable level of frustration is. But my main advice would be is, if you don't want to rebuy your pedal board 3 times, just buy a few things. Buy once, cry once. I don't have a lot of time. I'm just going to buy the best thing that I can afford now.
That's good. That's good.
Yeah.
So
maybe start off mono if you need to, and then build up to stereo.
Absolutely.
Trade around with your friends. One of the things that I learned from one of my musician friends years ago was always have cash in your pocket, because musicians aren't the best money managers. So if somebody's in need and they need cash today, always have cash in hand, and that's how you can get the good deals on used product.
You're stepping on some toes today, Charlie.
Sorry. The truth is the truth, man. I've gotten a lot of great deals from my friends because they needed money.
It's the truth. So along those same lines, so you're working with clients, you're working with, bigger like business solutions as well. But what's some common mistakes that you see musicians and, front of house making when it comes to interfacing their instruments with sound systems?
Two things I would say that I see a lot that I think are kind of mistake. One is not using your ears / having an open mind, right? A lot of people, and I include myself in this, we just get kind of set into, this is how it's done, and this is the way you do things, and I'm not gonna investigate, other possible thoughts or solutions. I'm not going to use my ears. This works, blah, 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 blah. And I just think that having an open mind about, because audio and science are constantly developing. So have an open mind. The other thing along that same line that I hear a lot is we just run our PA in mono. We just run our PA in mono
Oh,
because stereo has, there's no reason for stereo. And here's what I would say about that. Go listen to Dave Ratt's commentary on stereo versus mono on PAs. He's got a great couple of videos on that. And here's what I would say, especially so in churches. Stereo is not about presenting a stereophonic two speaker, I'm listening to music in my living room kind of experience. It's not about having a spatial sound field in a live sound environment. It's about using panning as another mixing tool to get the sounds from just being all stacked up on top of one another and moving them out of the way of the vocal. The most important thing in any almost any genre of music is the vocal. You're trying to get a message across. If you just even 10 and 2 panning, you know, even 10 and 2 panning, moving some things around, it's amazing how much difference that can have. You'll still hear, you can just take like a piano and pan that to one side, an acoustic piano with a single mic on it, just panning it slightly off center, moves it out of the way of the vocal. It allows the piano to be heard better. It allows the vocals to be heard better. So I would just encourage anybody that's just like stuck in the mud about that, please stop, take 10 minutes, reconfigure your PA for stereo, and just try it and see what happens. I think it'll revolutionize your mixing.
absolutely. This is one of those.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
This has been a moment of
Absolutely.
clarity.
So simple. That knob on your mixer that you've never touched before, give it a shot. See what happens, man.
Yeah, I think you know painting is one of those. It's not as attractive as a lot of other things that what if I mic up three different things, three different ways, and I move them back by different degrees? And the thing is like sometimes the simplest things can create some of the most profound results. And painting is one of those
Yeah.
where it's just like, it's huge. And for live sound, our live sound engineer, he's always all the time calling me back to the desk. And I'm like, dude, this is your job. Like, you're so much better at this.
Yeah.
If it's mixing in the box in a studio setting, like, here in my home studio right now, if I'm mixing in the box and I'm just flying tracks in, it's super easy. I mean, for me anyway, I've been doing it for over 20 years.
They're two different animals. I've done them both, and they're
Yes.
different animals. I have a lot more experience at live than I do at recording, but I've done them both, and yeah, you have to relearn a lot to do
Exactly.
either one.
Exactly. And that's what
Yeah.
some of the things that you're presenting here, though, like with these being able to flip polarities and being able to isolate lines and being able to send long cable runs without, and I think one thing too that, and maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I think something that has been overlooked as well is with the long cable runs, if you're not running, like a Dante system, something like that, if you're running a XLR cable and you're going 50, 60, 70 feet, it's now you're introducing latency. So,
I yeah, I would say if you are um, running analog signals over that, I think you're much more likely to pick up noise than you are anything. But that's the reason for running balanced mic cables
mhm,
rather than unbalanced like a guitar cable. The limitation on a guitar cable is about 30 feet before the cable capacitance will start to overtake. Not to mention the fact that one of the conductors that's carrying your signal is exposed. It can't act like a shield and a signal carrier at the same time. That's the reason for twisted pair with a shield. So it's not. I don't think it's. I don't think it's. I don't think it's latency per se, but the susceptibility to noise.
Mm,
But that can be mitigated with good design and
absolutely.
good cables.
Yeah.
Good cables are important.
That's a rabbit hole I went down when I first started getting into audio, and I seen so many individuals. There used to be an old forum. I'm sure you know the forum. They since changed their name. It used to be Gear Insert Explicative here.
Yeah,
And
gear slobs.
yeah, Gear Slobs, that's what it was. But you would get on there and these guys were like, a cable is a cable, it doesn't matter. And then there's other guys that's like, no, it has to be Mogami cables. So I went down the whole rabbit hole. But much to your point, what you said earlier, if you have questions about things, like do some blind shootout, some blind tests
Yeah,
yourself and hear it with your own ears. Because what I found out was I took two different 10-foot cables, an Amazon Basics cable and a, high dollar Mogami Gold cable. Plugged my guitar in straight into the interface, heard the DI first, then I plugged it straight into an amp. In both instances, there was a variable difference, and it was like, it wasn't night and day with the DI, but with the amp, it was huge.
yes, right. And that has to do with the interaction of cable capacitance and the output impedance of the guitar and the input impedance of the whatever you're sending it to. And the input impedance of an amp is different than the input impedance of a DI. It's one of those things where impedance, a lot of times it's very deceptive because impedance is just stated a lot of times in ohms, but the reality is that there's capacitance involved, there's inductance involved, there's resistance involved, and those are not constants. They're not, they vary with frequency, right? And that's another thing too, is a lot of people think, oh, I bought Mogami cable. And it's like, well, which Mogami cable? Because all Mogami cables are not. There's a chart out on the internet that you can find. Um, if you do a search for cable capacitance shootout, it'll probably come up. But it's it's a particular cable manufacturer that they did a measurement of capacitance per picofarads per foot or per meter actually of like 30 different unbalanced cables, and it's this big chart and it shows the differences in those. And so then you look at that and like you know low capacitance cable can be in the range of 50, 60 picofarad per foot. You compare that to some of the other stuff that's like can be as high as 180 picofarad per foot. That's 3 times the capacitance. And I'm sorry, I'm saying feet. It's per meter. And then you start multiplying that by, let's say you have a 4 meter cable, which would be a 12-foot cable. And now that's a lot more capacitance, which is going to roll off the top end.
Mm-hmm.
Now, here's a really interesting thing is I ran into a blues player years ago who said, yeah, I've got cables that are brighter and cables that are duller. And he said, I want that cable that sounds duller. I want that in my
Mm,
signal chain. I
interesting.
like the way that sounds. I like the way that my guitar and the pickups respond to my picking. So that comes back to what looks correct on paper may not be what the musician wants. There's a thing that's kind of an unquantifiable, and it's feel. And a lot of guys will talk about it, that they'll poo-poo it. They'll say that's stupid. That makes no difference. And it's like, it makes all the difference. There, um, there is a lot to be said for the interaction between the musician, the instrument, and then the rest of the equipment. Um, because it's kind of like the thing of, insert, guitar deity here, Eric Clapton, Eddie Van Halen, whatever. I picked up this guy's guitar and I played through his, and it still sounded like me. I think there's a famous story about
Mm-hmm.
Ed Nugent picking up Eddie Van Halen's rig, and he's like, I played it and I still sounded like me. And it's like, yeah, because, you are you. You're a
Right.
part of the whole signal chain. And yeah, and so that matters. That um, I can crunch numbers all day with the little calculator and be a propeller-headed geek and all these things. But in the end, it's like, how does a musician interact with this equipment? How do they feel about the equipment? That matters. That's real, but it's an unquantifiable. You just have to like do your best with the science as a builder. Do your best with the science. Send it to the player. Let them play through it and get their feedback and change it. Scott, that I mentioned before, we were doing some stuff. We were going back and forth with some prototyping. I changed literally one resistor, thinking that it was going to make things better. And he's like, this is different. What's different? And I was like, well, I don't, and he's looking at it, and he's like, you change these capacitors and this, that, and the other. I'm like, no, that shouldn't matter. That shouldn't matter. That's in the power section. And we finally get down to it. And I changed the value of one resistor in the output section, and it determined what the output impedance was. And I was like, okay. And so I built that. I had him send that prototype back. I changed that one resistor back to the original prototype value, and he's like, yep, that was it.
Wow.
Okay, so that guy's my golden ears guy right there. But that's proof that the way that things feel to a musician matter more than the math.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So we've talked a lot about live sound and, individuals playing for front of house for worship. And how do your products cater to both the live performances, pedal boards, things of that nature, as well as studio environments?
Yeah, we have obviously, clients who do both. And there are times that we, get feedback from them, and the studio is not the same as live. Um, there's it's funny because there's a lot of commonality, and yet um, there are certain things with the infrastructure where you're just kind of locked in. When we first did the TXRXS, the stereo, amp signal sender with the tactical Cat 5, I started talking to one of our first adopters of that, and we hadn't released it yet. It was still kind of on the DL, and um, I was a guy, a client, a regular client had bought two of our mono, TXRXM setups, and I was like, hey, we've got this. It's still kind of under development. Do you want to try this out? This and that and the other. And he's like, yeah, yeah. And he's like, oh, wait, this only works with tactical Cat 5. And I'm like, yeah, with the Ethercons. And he's like, well, I'm playing in studios and I can't just run another cable underneath the doors, right? Because all the doors in a
Mm-hmm.
studio are sealed. You don't have pass-throughs all the time and stuff like that. And he's like, I need to be able to connect into the XLR tie lines. What can we do here? It's like, oh, okay. So then that was where the idea of making adapters from the Ethercon to XLRs, we did it for the studio guys, but we also have it for our touring guys, so that in the event, the very unlikely event, because it hasn't happened yet, but in the unlikely event that one of those ethercon cables fails, you can I have anybody that's touring with the system, I just we just always include in that package a set of the ethercon to XLR adapters, because in the unlikely event that the cable fails, you can always pull out a pair of mic cables and use the adapters and get through the show while we overnight you another cable. Hasn't happened yet, but that we know that that possibility exists, and we don't want our clients to be caught, in a panic situation. We don't want to be a showstopper ever. That's terrible. It's a terrible place to put your clients, and we don't ever want to do that.
Well, Charlie, it sounds like you got your heart in the right place and you're really listening to your client base. You're trying to produce products that not only people need, but you're producing products they don't even know they need yet. And I appreciate everything that you're putting out there, man. And um, I appreciate you answering some questions today too. I'm glad I got to pick your brain because I think you've actually cleared up a lot of my own misconceptions, which was good. And I always love learning. So much appreciate that. So if people want to find out more about Pinstripe's pedals and they want to, or sorry, Pinstripe pedals, and they want to find out more about your lineup, where could they go? Is there a specific place or?
Just our website, pinstripepedals.com. You can always shoot us an email through the website, ask any questions you have. We love to answer questions. Also, shout out for our sister company, Slow Gear Electronics. We have the Made, and we also introduced a pedalboard specific headphone amplifier that addresses a lot of the needs that guys with modelers or dual modelers have. We were the first to market workalikes coming along soon. We're working on getting that into full production. We've done some limited production runs on that. We're expecting to have more of those built up and available on our Reverb shop. So that's just go to reverb.com and look for Slow Gear Electronics. We're expecting to have more of those hopefully by the end of the month or 1st of February. But yeah, there was no good solution for all my guitar playing dads who are doing their rehearsal on Friday nights and Saturday nights while the wife and kids have gone to bed, and they need to stick on headphones and practice late at night.
Yet again, creating solutions.
Yeah.
And the whole family's happy now.
Hey, yeah, we tell guys, it's like, this is not for you. This is for your wife.
Yeah. Talk about marketing.
She's the one that's going to like this more than you.
There's some marketing genius right there.
Hey, yeah, we try.
So before we send you out, I've got 2 questions. These are curveball questions.
Okay.
And I ask everyone who comes on the show these curveball questions. It's a good way to sort of end things on a high note. The first question, it's a 2-part question. The first question is, what is your favorite color?
Oh yeah, blue.
What does the color blue taste like?
Oh, I don't know. Maybe blueberries. I mean, I think you probably have to do some like drugs to find that out. Don't you? That's what I've always heard. I don't know.
He's like, that's what I've heard.
I don't want to taste colors, but yeah, or maybe at least Skittles, right? Taste
right,
right. Catchphrase.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Charlie, for coming on. Thank you for helping to clear up some of the common misconceptions about DI boxes, as well as a myriad of other things. I could honestly, you probably need to write a book. If you haven't thought about it, you need to. I mean, a lot of the stuff that you said it in such a way to where you took that sort of high and lofty ideas and brought them down to us plain folks. So thank you so much. If
Yeah.
you, if anybody wants to check out Pinstripe Pedals, as he said, go to pinstripepedals.com. He's got a myriad of, man, there's so many things on there. You can get lost in the weeds, but every one of them, if you look closely, will not only address a specific need, but it's affordable. I think if you look at the alternatives that are on the market right now, his lineup is not only more affordable, but it's actually made, in my opinion, it's made with even better components. So I don't know how they're doing it over there, but
Yeah. 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 That's the other thing, is maximum durability. We're building for touring clients.
awesome. Well, Charlie, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you, Robert.
If anybody
Let's
has
do it
any
again, man.
questions, feel free to comment below this video, and I'll try to get up with him and see if we can get questions answered at a later date if that's something you guys would like. So until next time, guys, thanks for all hopping on.
Yeah. Let's do it again, Robert.
All right. Video is officially, yeah. Yeah, there was a couple times there I was like, man, I'm supposed to be asking questions. This guy's going on a roll here.